Action's on Steven Silverman. Queens under the gun.
Silverman was on the American Poker reality show 2 months, 2 million. It was the highest rated poker reality show in its time slot starring Steve Silverman.
He's raised to 15,000. Dan Smith has Queen Jack suited.
Dan's in rough shape, but he's got the exact kind of hand you can sometimes crack bigger hands with.
He calls. Negreanu's out. As are Bakar and Siva. Ravensbeck will fold the big blind, so we're heads up to the flop. And that flop is Jack, Jack 5, trips for Smith.
Hi-ya! Steve's almost always going to bet this because he's almost always going to have the best hand.
He does continue for 27,000.
I don't think he's folding.
Nope. He calls.
Dan opts to just calls. There are plenty of hands he could peel a turn with that aren't nearly as strong.
6 of spades on the turn. Smith with a virtual lock on the hand, 98% equity.
None of these cards are really saving Silverman.
Bets again, 65,000.
Now, does Dan raise or just call and go for all his value on the river?
He calls.
River it is.
230,000 in the middle, Silverman with not much more than that behind. The case jack on the river, quads for Dan Smith.
This is just a horrific card for Silverman. He's now got a full house, and in his mind, he's only losing the aces or kings, which probably would have gotten him 3-bet pre-flop.
Mullen.
Silverman shoves.
Oy.
Call.
Dan Smith calls.
Quick check of the quads.
Get in.
No kidding.
That is just brutal.
Steven Silverman eliminated.
Good luck, guys. Appreciate that.
He folds. Eric Seidel opens from under the gun +1 with ace-queen to 16,000. Dan Smith has kings.
Almost always going to see a 3-bet with kings.
Not this time. He just calls.
Interesting. Dan's not wanting to look too strong, so he just calls. Calling reps a much wider range, and there's always a chance someone gets cute behind you.
Heads up to the flop. Quack, quack, quack.
Eric will probably continue with what he presumes will be the best hand a big percentage of the time. Dan, of course, flops a full house.
Seidel does continue for 18,000.
Let's see if Dan continues to play this deceptively by just calling. I think raising here would be a real mistake.
He does call.
Don't want to chase away that action.
The turn is a queen. Seidel now has a full house.
Really terrible card for Eric. He's now going to have the best hand almost all of the time.
Fires again. 25,000.
We know Eric is more likely to call raise here than I am to call an ex-girlfriend after 2 a.m., but does Dan know that?
Dan does raise, makes it 75,000 total.
Dan claims to keep his cool in these spots. What do you people think? Is he giving anything away? Let us know on Twitter, #@EBTBarcelona. Now, don't get me wrong, this raise looks extremely strong, but A, Dan's had quads once already. What are the odds? Am I right, people? B, B, and C closing. Always be closing.
Eh?
I remember now. Even though that raise looks super strong, there are, in Eric's mind, only 2 hands that are beating him, kings and aces. And what are the odds Dan flatted with those pre-flop?
On this occasion, he did. Seidel now checks the river, having called Smith's raise on the turn.
Would have been really sick if a deuce had hit. Dan obviously has to bet again, but he can't be like me when a girl lets me buy her a drink in a bar all eager. That's how you scare him off.
234,000 in the pot. He bets 200,000.
This is just a gross spot for Eric, you can tell, because all the liquid just drained from his body. You can't fault him for thinking about this, and you can't fault him if he eventually calls either. You can, however, throw him a parade if he somehow manages to lay this down. This is your run-of-the-mill / incredibly rare cooler crying call.
He can't get away from it. He calls, and Smith gets maximum value.
Eric Seidel's been getting brutalized by Dan Smith today.
Seidel loses 310,000 there.
Dan? Don't say anything. Don't look at him. He is a legend.
I like the way he played that. In all things considered, I think it was really, really good way to play it.
Quiet, Daniel. He's right there.
So Dan Smith extends his chip lead. He's now playing. He's in the cutoff. And he has pocket aces.
Well, if you're looking to be the chip leader, I always recommend picking up aces. I don't know why more players don't do it. It's a no-brainer.
He raises to 14,000. Negreanu has jacks.
Daniel's been pretty miserable so far today, and it looks like he might get his wish for it all to be coming to an end.
I'm going to make it 38,000. I don't want to screw it up and end up
That'll be a 3-bet.
in potpourri of the mess.
Math is hard. Dr. Scalp is out of there.
Back on Smith.
I'm thinking re-raise.
Which will probably induce a shove, which will be called.
Okay, good luck. I call.
Sure enough.
That's good. I was like, whatever, let's just do it. I told you no thinking today, no matter what, I promised.
Story checks out.
I was happy he raised me. I really was. I wanted to get it in, but not against that. To prepay.
I don't think you're allowed to get cute when you have aces. None of that.
No jack.
Not even close.
Negreanu is going to need to see a jack on the turn or river to survive.
Aces, huh?
Yep.
Just the river to come. 2 outs for Daniel Negreanu.
Good luck, man. I don't think it's coming anymore. I changed my mind.
Insurance?
He's in this tournament for 100,000. He's got an amazing record in the super high roller format. He's 3 for 3 so far.
Dan Smith. He can do it.
Make that 3 for 4.
Good luck, man. All right, bud. Good luck, y'all.
Folds. Michael Watson, 6-5 suited. Raises, makes it 22K. Eric Seidel has pocket sixes.
Likely to see a call.
Sure enough, Eric does call. Dan Smith on the button has ace-king.
Dan's almost certainly going to 3-bet here, in position with all that action behind him. And don't forget those massive chips.
He re-raises to 63,000. Sam Chartier's just joined the feature table. He folds. Simon Ravensbeck also has ace-king.
Another ace-king out there. This is going to make things pretty crazy.
Ravensbeck 4 bets to 134,000. Watson and Seidel both fold.
Now this is a little less exciting now since these two are destined to chop.
Smith 5 bets.
I'm all in.
Ravensbeck moves all in, and Smith calls.
This guy Ravensbeck must have some rep considering none of these guys ever appear to be afraid to get it in with him. 96% chance of a chop. No reason to hide that gorge face now.
The flop has 2 spades on it, and Smith holds the ace of spades.
Backdoor sweat.
And there's a spade on the turn. Oh, come on. That would be too gross, right?
To anyone else holding spades, I don't want to know.
Trust me, neither does Ravensbeck.
And the river brings another spade.
Oof. That was less cool than talking about a guy's bachelor party in front of his wife.
That was grotesque.
Dan, it's okay if you want to laugh.
Ravensbeck gets 4 flush, and a big stack is taken out by the chip leader, who now has close to 2.8 million, a phenomenal number of chips.
Can we please lose another player soon? That average makes me uncomfortable.
Dan Smith, Jack 9 offsuit. Smith, the overwhelming tournament chip leader.
Been folded to him. He's in relatively late position.
Yeah, he's in the cutoff. He raises to 36,000. Gets rid of Kurzovic on the button.
Kurzovic folds a dominating hand.
JC Alvarado folds the small blind. Mike McDonald has Jack 10 in the big blind.
Also has Smith dominated, but he is out of position.
Looks like Mike will defend, and we will see a flop. That flop, 7 Jack 9, 2 pair for Smith, the straight draw and top pair for McDonald.
This flop is the worst thing that happened to a McDonald since trans fats got banned.
McDonald checks to the razor. Smith continues for 52,000.
Even though Mike's way behind, top pair and a good gut shot is almost just as good. Just not quite.
McDonald calls.
Looks like he might even think his hand is too strong to raise there.
The turn is another jack, another full house for Dan Smith. McDonald improves to trips.
This is just getting insanely bad. This is the worst thing to happen to a McDonald's since New York City banned large sodas.
McDonald checks a second time. Smith, a better second time by the looks of things. Sure enough, 133,000.
There's a good shot. Mike just calls again, wanting Dan to keep repping that jack, which he is doing because he has it.
How much is Mike McDonald going to lose in this hand?
At least another 133,000.
Yeah, he calls, taking us to the river. 462,000 in the pot. No 10 on the river. Smith still good.
Let's see how Mike plays this. Does he lead the river and hope for a call? No, he checks the river and hopes for a bet.
He's going to get it.
He is going to get it.
371,000.
That is a huge bet. Now Mike might be worried Dan's actually got a better jack. This is one of those polarizing bet sizes. Dan's not doing this with most of his non-nut value hands.
Oh. Mike calls.
Whoops.
1.2 million chip pot will slide across to Dan Smith.
There's really not much you can do there. You gonna fold 3 jacks? No. Hand was just a cold deck. The worst thing to happen to a McDonald's since heart disease.
Dan Smith is now playing nearly 3.5 million. He has more than 3 times the tournament average.
He's riding the chip train up Cha-Ching Mountain. Programming on the Discovery Channel.
Blinds at 8,000, 16,000 with a 2,000 ante. Action has been folded around to Iñat Liviu. The Romanian pro has pocket 10s. And he is raising, makes it 32,000. Ryan Kamaya folds. Steve O'Dwyer will pass the jack 8.
Woof.
8-7 suited for JC Alvarado.
On the button, yum, yum. If this hand looks delicious, then being in position is like looking at its picture on the menu.
Alvarado will call. Litvinov gives up the small blind. Dan Smith in the big blind as Queen 6 suited.
Dan's getting good pot odds. A call here would be borderline if he didn't have all the chips in the universe, but he does, so it's totes fine.
So Smith calls as well. We are going 3-way to the flop. That flop, 6-9 deuce. Second pair for Smith, an up and down draw for Alvarado. Liviu still leads with 10s.
Liviu was the original raiser.
55.
And he's got the most to protect against.
Dan Smith checks to him. Liviu bets 55,000.
I don't know that this bet will get either of these players to fold, however.
Alvarado calls.
Liviu's actually got 2 blockers to his hand.
Smith calls as well. It's a 3-way to the turn.
Calls a little questionable, but Dan's getting stupid pot odds again.
And he hits another 6 on the turn. Trips for the chip leader.
This is a grosser turn than the twist in the crying game. JC is now dead to 4 outs. Dan all but locks his hand up, and no one's really likely to think this card changed anything.
Dan checks a second time. Liviu bets a second time, 125,000. Action on Alvarado.
He's getting a decent price to chase his straight. Meanwhile, Dan's got a super disguised monster.
Alvarado calls.
JC was getting an even better price, assuming Dan comes along for the ride. And spoiler alert, he's not folding.
But is he raising? No, he's calling.
Dan overcalls on 3 streets. Gotta wonder if anyone's spidey sense is tingling yet.
3-way to the river, which is another 6. This is the second time in the tournament that Dan Smith has had quads.
The second time today. All pairs now have full houses, just like Liviu over there has got.
Smith checks a third time. Liviu now checks as well.
Wow, either a very astute player or a guy who's going to lose value a lot of the time. I'm willing to chalk it up to some kind of insane physical read.
Alvarado with the... He waves the white flag.
Because Liviu somehow has the clairvoyance to check the 6 nuts, Dan Smith gets locked out of the First National Bank of Value 5th Street branch. Just quads, guys, just quads. These any good? Quads any good?
Now up to nearly 4 million in chips.
Just almost 4 times the tournament average. No big deal. Cash, though.
Over to the other. Pocket sixes for JC Alvarado as we return to the main feature table.
Well, JC's on a bit of a heater.
He raises, makes it 45,000.
Speaking of heaters, this is the one guy at the table running hotter than JC. This kid makes more hands than a mannequin factory.
Dan Smith has King Jack off. Calls from the cutoff.
Speaking of, have you ever seen Mannequin 2 on the move? It's really underrated.
You may be the only person on the planet who's seen that movie. Tobias Reinkemeyer has Jack 9 suited in the big blind.
It's a decent hand, and he's getting ridiculous pot odds.
He calls as well.
Even though we know he's dominated by Dan.
Three-way to the flop. And Tobias Reinkemeyer flops a full house. Dan Smith flops trips. Nothing for Alvarado, the original raiser. Action's been checked to Smith. He bets 85K.
Dan Smith has made another huge hand. This time it's not the biggest, though.
Reinkemeyer calls.
After betting a call, not much shot JC sticks around here.
He folds. Heads up to the turn. Which is a 6. JC's so lucky he folded on the flop. Reinkemeyer checks again. Smith bets again. 181,000.
Sick cooler developing here.
Reinkemeyer calls.
Both players are playing this like they absolutely know they have the best hand, and most of the time they'd both be right. As for right now, Dan is in deep doo-doo.
The river's a king. Smith now has a better full house.
OMG. This kid spikes more than a lie detector on Capitol Hill.
Reinkemeyer checks, hoping to induce some kind of bluff from Smith. This is not a bluff. This is a value bet. 384,000, and it's bound to get paid off. It may even get raised.
This is a slam dunk value raise situation. There are only 2 hands on the planet that are beating you, Kings and King Jack. King Jack is the more believable of the two if it weren't for the fact that it would have to be the case Jack.
Hold on.
Reinkemeyer shoves.
The double check.
Call.
Dan Smith calls, and we lose the German from the tournament.
Like the refrigerators at the Center for Disease Control, this is just a sick cooler.
Good hand.
No kidding.
Tobias, it's okay if you want to scream.
All right, good luck. Yeah.
Somebody go ask Dan Smith if it's uncomfortable having that horseshoe up there. Looks uncomfortable. What? I mean under his hat.
14 players remain, and Dan Smith now has close to 5.3 million. We will crack open that €3 million prize pool. 8th place pays 123 grand. The winner gets more than $1 million.
Kind of a big bubble here. 9th place gets 0.
Eric Seidel has folded. Mike Watson has 10-6. He also passes. Ace-king for Dan Smith.
He has all the chips and all the good cards.
Raising with a legitimate hand this time, 65,000. The short-stacked Artem Litvinov with ace-10 suited.
He's got to push here. He's just unlucky to run into ace-king, or maybe even worse.
He moves all in for 159,000. We know he's going to get called in at least one spot. JC Alvarado in the small blind. Folds an ace. Mike McDonald, queen 9, gives up the big blind. Dan Smith calls. Litvinov's at risk.
I wish he could have at least got one last coin flip in. I'm going to be so bummed if he doesn't make the final table. Maybe Shakurchi will do something funny and entertaining, like sit on an ab ball. What do you think, Talal, huh?
Litvinov looking for a 10 or hearts. Only one heart on the flop. There is a 20% chance of a split pot. A 13% chance that Litvinov wins outright and doubles up.
I never thought I'd say this before, but come on, Russia!
The turn card is a diamond. Litvinov needs a 10 for the win.
Only 2 left in the deck.
The river is an 8. Dan Smith's ace-king holds. Artem Litvinov is the bubble boy. So much for the lucky chair. Dan Smith with the chip lead in the small blind.
Pass your chips, please.
Dan should be raising him here 100% of the time and just calling the shove. Or...
Yep, he bets enough to put McCrink all in.
Snap call. Snap call. Snap call. Snap call.
Good luck.
McCrink eventually makes the call.
Nice call.
Jim won't need luck. He'll just need some non-unluck.
Hearts are my favorite too, just so you're warned. And I'm a flush specialist.
And he's been running super hot in this tournament so far.
And he's dressed like a plumber, one of the Mario brothers.
That's the wrong color. That's the proper color.
Oh yeah.
Specialist, more like a shaman.
9 of hearts would be pretty great.
Well, that's sporty. There's Jim's wife on the rail. She doesn't want to see a heart.
There it is. That'll do it for McCrink.
Nice playing with you.
You are a flush specialist, aren't you?
You should see him work the urinal.
Jim McCrink, first man out of the EPT Barcelona Super High Roller.
These are regular biscuits. His friend is on Atkins. Didn't I say that?
That was a pertinent detail that you omitted. Action has been folded to Mike McDonald, who has ace-10 under the gun +1. And he's raising, makes it 120,000.
Mike McDonald, you are my little gentleman.
Mike Watson on the button. 6 deuce. He'll muck that. Dan Smith in the small blind has ace-jack of clubs.
This is 1,000% a 3-bet. There's a good shot these two get it in here, provided Hillary doesn't wake up with a monster.
Smith will re-raise. Makes it 295,000. Hillary does not have a hand. It's back on Mike McDonald.
Well, Mike McDonald, win in Rome. That was Shh's girlfriend, Cam. This is Dan's girlfriend, Monica. Hi, Monica.
He shoves.
I call.
And Dan Smith calls.
Sweet Lincoln's mullet. It's Domination Nation for Mike McDonald and his Ron Burgundy shirt. Mike McDonald's kind of a big deal, but unfortunately Dan Smith has many leather-bound books.
That is a horrible flop for McDonald.
Mike, only 7% to survive this hand now. It's science.
Looking for a 10. Now looking for a jack.
Well, he didn't lose any equity there. It's so damn hot. Milk was a bad choice.
3 outs for Timex. No jack on the river. He's eliminated in 5th place.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, it really got out of hand fast. Brick killed a guy.
Nice playing with you.
Handshakes all around. Stay classy, Waterloo, Ontario, Canada.
A disappointing finish for Mike McDonald. He started the day as one of the big stacks, second in chips, and not that far behind Dan Smith. So he was probably expecting a better return than 215,000 euros. And Dan Smith's chip lead is now just ridiculous. 7.4 million? Come on.
Either that or Rakes pick Chip Uppington.
So we're now four-handed. All the remaining players guaranteed at least 300,000 euros. Action's on Mike Watson. He has Queen-Jack offsuit under the gun, and he raises to 130,000. Dan Smith still stacking Mike McDonald's chips.
Well, it takes a while when you have 7.5 million of them.
Lines are still 30-60, Dan. Ace-10 of clubs.
Well, he's certainly not folding.
Question is, will he call, play a flop in position, or re-raise? He calls.
He calls not wanting to let Mike get away, but now it's him. He's gonna have to get away.
Hillary Samias with ace-queen suited in the small blind. 3 bets to 400,000. JC Alvarado has king-queen in the big blind.
What in the heck is going on here? Are we playing with a pinochle deck?
JC folds, as does Mike Watson. Action's back on Dan Smith.
Hillary had every single hand dominated somehow. Smith probably can't fold this in position, and if he calls, he's got to pretty much call any bet on the flop as well.
I'm all in.
He shoves.
I call.
And Hillary calls.
And despite the fact that he's behind, this was a great pressure shove from the big stack. He knows Hillary is going to be 3-betting a pretty wide range, some of which he could fold. And now that he's gotten in bad, he can still lose without it hurting much.
Hillary is ahead, but he is the player at risk.
Kymppi tulee aina. Mulla on fiilis, mä tiedän. Siikattaa kymppi tulee aina.
Hillary says he always gets stung by a 10 and he can feel it's coming.
Well, Dan Smith hasn't lost many of these confrontations, no matter what he's held. I don't know if he's lost any.
Here comes the flop. which has a 10 on it. Hillary's feeling was correct.
Dan sucked out more often than the world's worst rattlesnake handler.
Hillary Samias has 1 out because JC Alvarado and Mike Watson both folded queens.
Peter Jetton on the right. He busted out just before the final table.
Hillary with just 11% equity. Make that 3%.
One last card in the deck that can save him. One chance to hit it. Dan Smith about to be an absolute beast.
The river is not the case, queen. We lose Hillary Samias in best.
We got there.
9-10 for Dan Smith on the button in the small blind. Raises to 225,000. Pocket queens for JC Alvarado.
Not only does JC have the chip lead, but now he's getting hands. Typically the ladies come after you in the super high roller, but I'm sure he's happy to see them now.
He 3-bets to 700,000. Things turning around here for Dan Smith. Is his golden run over?
Possibly. That hand's a teensy bit weak to be calling 3-bets with.
Smith flops bottom pair and a straight draw.
JC's holding 2 outs to his gut shot, though, and his implied odds aren't great if he hits it.
He goes check on the flop, and it's a 9 on the turn. I spoke too soon. Dan Smith's run is by no means over.
And unfortunately for JC, that's going to look like a very safe card for him.
JC now bets 750K.
JC looks a little agitated. You know Dan's not reaching for chips with total air here. Best case scenario, he's got a jack or a super strong draw. Worst case, the hand he's got.
Smith calls. We go to the river, which is the inconsequential 2 of clubs.
That is such a brick. JC might think he can bet for value. Poor guy.
He is betting 1.4 million.
Dan most likely should be raising this river. It's really easy for JC to be value betting worse, which he is, and he's just not going to be beat very often. Also, it's such a polarizing spot that he's going to get paid off a fair amount of the time.
That is a big raise. 4.8 million total.
And we had to cut away because JC just threw up in his mouth a little. Shoots him a look. It's a very polarizing bet. Dan's either got a 9 or he doesn't. JC's put so many chips in this pot and was probably so sure he had the best hand. This spot is grosser than the piece of carpet the dog sleeps on.
Alvarado makes a great laydown.
Another really well-played hand by JC. It's a shame he had to lose it.
Nice hand there.
And Dan Smith is
when he was already a millionaire.
Blinds up again, 61-20 with a 20K ante. Kings for Alvarado.
JC's got about 20 bigs.
250.
He raises to 250. Dan Smith has ace-king.
Oh, it's all going in here. Really good spot for JC to double up.
All in.
Smith shots, Alvarado calls.
Now, even with this loss, Dan's still going to have a monster stack compared to JC. He'll still have more than a 2-to-1 chip lead.
Don't assume it will be a loss. Dan Smith has got lucky from time to time in this tournament.
Truth.
He does have an overcard. He does have 30% equity. The flop has an ace on it.
Oh, man, isn't that the story of this tournament? That's the whole story. Dan Smith plays good. Dan Smith gets business end of cooler. Dan Smith gets there. The end.
Might be the 1-outer.
Just one card in the deck can save JC Alvarado.
Second place is pretty good.
Burn.
Dan Smith is on the verge of lifting the trophy here in Barcelona. The only river card that will stop that happening is the King of Spades. It's a 3. Dan Smith has done it. JC Alvarado is the runner-up, but bow before King Dan, who's earned the super high roller crown.
It was destiny. Kid could do no wrong.